Most people don't fail because they're not smart enough, or because they don't have opportunities. They fail because they waste the only thing they can never get back: time. Steve Jobs understood this truth deeply, almost painfully. Today, we're going to explore his darkest power lessons on how to spend your time wisely for success. This isn't about productivity hacks or to-do lists. This is about how Jobs turned time into a weapon, and how you can too. Time is limited, and Steve Jobs knew it more than anyone. He often said that your time is the most precious resource you'll ever have, far more valuable than money, far more important than talent, and far more ruthless than opportunity. Because while you can lose money and earn it back, while you can make mistakes and recover from them, once you lose time, it's gone forever. That's the dark truth Jobs carried with him, and it shaped the way he built Apple, the way he led his team, and the way he lived his life. Jobs treated time like a currency, but not like the money you carry in your wallet. Money circulates, money grows, money returns. Time does not. Every day he woke up, he was painfully aware that the clock was ticking. Each second that passed was 1 second less of his life, one less chance to build something meaningful, one less chance to create the future he imagined. And because of this, he developed a ruthless respect for time that most people never truly grasp. Think about the way most people live. They give their hours away freely, as if they were infinite. They waste afternoons scrolling, evenings complaining, mornings procrastinating. And when it's too late, when the years slip through their fingers, they wonder where it all went. Jobs understood this danger. He knew that if he didn't treat time with the highest respect, he would wake up one day realizing he had been living someone else's life instead of his own. That's why he moved with such intensity. Jobs didn't just go through the motions. He attacked his work with urgency, because in his mind, every second was a chance to either build greatness or let it vanish. He once said, "My favorite things in life don't cost any money. The most precious resource we all have is time." And he lived by that. You could see it in the way he ran meetings. If he felt something was wasting time, he cut it short. If a project was dragging on without momentum, he killed it. If a conversation wasn't moving the vision forward, he ended it. To him, inefficiency was theft, someone stealing from the only thing he could never replenish. This wasn't just about discipline. It was about survival. Jobs knew his life was short. He knew death was closer than most people dared to admit. That awareness sharpened his focus and made him almost obsessive about cutting away the unnecessary. It gave him a kind of power, because while everyone else assumed they had endless time to figure things out, he behaved as if every moment mattered, and that urgency set him apart. When you look at Apple's success, it wasn't built on chance or luck. It was built on an almost brutal respect for time. Jobs refused to let distractions consume his energy. He refused to allow delays to slow momentum. He forced his team to think quickly, to act decisively, to value speed without sacrificing vision. Because in his eyes, greatness couldn't wait. If you had an idea, you pursued it now. If you saw an opportunity, you seized it now. If you wanted to create something extraordinary, you didn't push it to tomorrow, because tomorrow might not come. The darkest lesson here is simple, but uncomfortable. Most people are careless with time because they don't feel the weight of mortality. They live as if they'll get endless chances, endless tomorrows. Jobs lived the opposite way. He embraced the ticking clock. He let it drive him, push him, and remind him that everything must be done with urgency, or it would never be done at all. That is why his life, though cut short, was so impactful. He created in decades what others couldn't create in a lifetime, because he never forgot that the clock was his greatest enemy and his greatest teacher. Steve Jobs had a gift. But it wasn't what most people think. It wasn't just his creativity. It wasn't only his obsession with design. It wasn't even his ability to inspire people. Jobs' real power came from something far darker, something far harder for most people to practice. It was his ability to say no. He once said, "Focusing is about saying no." And he wasn't exaggerating. Jobs didn't become great by chasing every idea, every opportunity, every possibility that came his way. He became great because he understood the danger of distraction. Most people try to do too many things. They chase too many goals at once. They spread their energy thin across dozens of projects, dozens of ambitions, and in the end, they accomplish almost nothing. Jobs took the opposite path. He was brutal with his focus, merciless with his decisions. He said no more times than he said yes, and that was the secret. Imagine walking into Apple during the early years. You'd find teams excited about hundreds of projects, engineers eager to pitch new ideas, and designers filled with creative energy. Most leaders would have been tempted to say yes to everything, to encourage every direction, to try and capture every opportunity. But Jobs, he would walk in, look at the list, and slash most of it in half. Then he'd slash it again, until only the few projects that mattered most remained. And then he would demand that those few projects be pursued with everything his team had. This approach wasn't gentle. It was ruthless. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was drowning in too many products, too many scattered directions. Apple was on the brink of collapse. Jobs looked at the chaos and immediately began cutting. He killed off product lines. He ended divisions. He told teams that their work, no matter how good, no matter how passionate, wasn't worth continuing. Because in his mind, good wasn't enough. Focus demanded sacrifice, and sacrifice meant saying no to good so you could have the space to create something truly great. Think about what that requires. It's easy to say yes. Yes feels good. Yes makes people happy. Yes avoids conflict. But Jobs wasn't interested in pleasing people. He was interested in building something iconic. Saying no broke hearts. Saying no created tension. Saying no sometimes left people angry, even devastated. But Jobs knew that without those hard choices, Apple would never have the discipline to rise from the ashes. And he was right. Because out of that ruthless pruning came the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the products that changed the world. Here's the darkest part of this lesson. Saying no isn't just about products or projects. It's about people. Jobs also said no to people who slowed him down. People who didn't match his vision. People who couldn't meet his impossible standards. He didn't waste time trying to convince or carry those who weren't aligned. He cut ties. Because he believed that focus is not just about what you're working on, but also about who you're working with. To him, the wrong people were as dangerous as the wrong ideas. And that's where his power becomes something most people can't stomach. It takes a rare kind of courage to look at opportunities, even good ones, and walk away. It takes an even rarer kind of courage to look at people, even talented ones, and decide they don't belong on the journey. Jobs didn't just have the vision, he dared to protect it. That's why Apple didn't look like any other company. That's why its products didn't look like anyone else's products. Because while the rest of the world was busy saying yes to everything, Jobs built a culture where no was the word that preserved clarity. Most people fear not. They think no closed doors. They think no limits to possibilities. Jobs believed the opposite. Every no created space. Every non-protected energy. Every no sharpened vision. And every no brought him one step closer to the purity of what mattered most. That's how he built focus into a weapon. Not by chasing everything, but by cutting away until only the essential remained. Steve Jobs had a secret weapon. But it wasn't technology. It wasn't designed. It wasn't even Apple itself. His secret weapon was death. The awareness of mortality. The knowledge that his time was running out. While most people live as if they'll never die, Jobs lived as if death was always standing behind him, whispering in his ear. And that awareness gave him a kind of urgency that most people never feel in their entire lives. Jobs once stood on stage at Stanford and told graduates, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." For him, death wasn't a shadow to be feared. It was a compass, pointing him toward what mattered most. He would wake up in the morning and look in the mirror. Then he'd ask himself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And if the answer was no too many days in a row, he knew he had to change something. This wasn't philosophy, it was practice. Jobs used mortality as fuel. While others delayed their dreams, waiting for the right moment, he acted now. While others wasted weeks debating, he decided quickly. While others played it safe, he took risks. Because in his mind, time was slipping away, and the cost of hesitation was unforgivable. That's why he moved fast. That's why Apple didn't wait 10 years to launch the iPhone. That's why his team worked under pressure that felt unbearable. Jobs created urgency by reminding himself and everyone around him, the clock is ticking, and it doesn't care about your excuses. But this urgency came with a dark edge. Living with death so close in your mind changes you. It makes you impatient. It makes you relentless. It makes you unwilling to tolerate anything that feels meaningless. Jobs didn't have time for half-hearted work. He didn't have time for mediocrity. He didn't have time for people who lacked commitment. To him, every wasted hour was one step closer to the end, and that gave him a sharpness, a ferocity that could be intimidating. He demanded intensity from others because he demanded it from himself. Think about the effect this had on Apple. Most companies move slowly. They drag their feet with committees and approvals. They polish things endlessly before they release them. Apple under Jobs was different. It moved with urgency because Jobs' awareness of death made him allergic to delay. He forced decisions, he cut hesitation, he demanded action. His philosophy was clear: better to act boldly and fail than to stall and lose the chance forever. That's why Apple leapt ahead of the world with products people didn't even know they needed. Jobs' relationship with mortality forced him to build as if tomorrow might never come. And he was right. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. For Jobs, it wasn't just a theory, it was reality. His battle with cancer only deepened this urgency. Even as his body weakened, his drive didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. He knew he didn't have decades left, so he squeezed every ounce out of the time he had. Every launch, every keynote, every product became a race against the inevitable. He wasn't waiting for life to permit him. He was creating, building, pushing, because the clock was always ticking louder. This is the darkest power lesson from Steve Jobs. When you accept death, you stop wasting time. Most people avoid thinking about mortality because it makes them uncomfortable. Jobs embraced it because it made him unstoppable. Knowing the end is coming frees you. It strips away the illusion that you have something to lose. It destroys the excuses you hide behind. And it forces you to act with urgency because you know the sand in the hourglass is running out. Jobs lived with that truth in his bones. And it drove him to accomplish more in his short life than most people could in several lifetimes. Steve Jobs didn't try to do everything. He didn't spread himself across dozens of projects or chase every shiny opportunity that came his way. Instead, he became obsessed with one principle: focus on what truly matters. And this wasn't the kind of focus people talk about in productivity books or motivational seminars. Jobs' version of focus was extreme. It was ruthless. It was a kind of obsession that most people would find uncomfortable, even unbearable. When Jobs returned to Apple in the late 90s, the company was drowning under its own weight. Too many products, too many directions, too much clutter. Most companies would have tried to save everything, to keep all options open, to play it safe. Jobs did the opposite. He killed almost everything. He stripped Apple down to just a handful of products. 4 quadrants: consumer and professional, desktop and portable. That was it. Everything else, gone. To outsiders it looked reckless, but to Jobs, it was necessary, because he believed the only way to create something extraordinary was to pour all your time, energy, and creativity into the essentials and burn everything else away. This wasn't just about simplifying business. It was about simplifying life. Jobs understood that your attention is limited. If you give it to too many things, you end up with nothing. So he carved out space to devote himself completely to what mattered most: building products that merged technology and art, creating tools that empowered people, shaping a future that didn't exist yet. He didn't care about being busy. He cared about being meaningful. Think about the iPhone. It wasn't born from trying to compete with every gadget on the market. It came from Jobs' obsession with making one device that could replace them all. Instead of giving people more, he gave them less, but better. That was his philosophy. He wanted fewer distractions, fewer compromises, fewer wasted efforts. Because focus isn't about cramming more into your life. It's about stripping everything away until only the core remains. But here's the dark side of that focus: it demanded sacrifice. Jobs didn't just ignore distractions, he destroyed them. He ignored opportunities that could have generated significant revenue for Apple. He cut ideas that seemed promising but didn't serve the bigger vision. He dismissed suggestions, sometimes coldly, if they didn't align with the essentials. And he did the same in his personal life. He didn't try to balance everything. He didn't try to be everywhere at once. He invested his time where he believed it mattered most, and he let the rest fall away. This kind of obsession comes at a cost. Most people aren't willing to pay it. They want success but also comfort. They want impact but also safety. They want greatness but also the approval of everyone around them. Jobs knew you couldn't have both. He knew that to focus on what truly matters means turning your back on almost everything else. And that's why his focus was so powerful. It wasn't partial. It was total. Look at Apple's product line under Jobs. It wasn't filled with endless variations, endless models, endless updates. It was clean. It was disciplined. It was intentional. Every product carried his fingerprint, because every product had his full attention. He poured himself into it, demanding perfection, demanding clarity, demanding that nothing diluted the vision. Because for him, focus wasn't just a strategy, it was survival. It was the only way to build something that could last. The lesson here is one most people don't want to face. Your life will be defined not by how much you do, but by what you choose to cut away. Success doesn't come from addition, it comes from subtraction. Jobs understood this better than anyone. He didn't let the world decide what mattered to him. He decided. And once he decided, he poured everything into it. That is why his time, limited as it was, created ripples that still shape the world today. Steve Jobs lived his life with the weight of time pressing down on him. He understood that every second wasted was a second lost forever. He said no to distractions, even when it hurt. He carried death on his shoulder, letting it drive him forward, never letting him forget how fragile this life is. And he poured his entire being into only what mattered most, cutting away everything else until all that remained was vision, focus, and impact. That's why his story doesn't feel like a chance. It feels inevitable, because when you live with that kind of intensity, When you treat time as the rarest currency, when you strip your life down to its core and pursue it with everything you have, the world has no choice but to notice. The truth is, most people will never dare to live this way. But for those who do, the reward isn't comfort. It isn't easy. The reward is the chance to carve your name into the world before the clock runs out.